After putting it off for a good while, I finally decided to hunker down and watch seasons 2 and 3 of Marvel's What If, a series based on the question that has brought comic classics for decades like, what if Spider-Man joined the Fantastic Four? What if Thor was a Herald of Galactus? What if the Avengers defeated everybody? And what if Tony Stark became Doctor Doom?
Oh my god!
But with there being a What If series, this big question had now been animated for our enjoyment, and despite nearly endless concepts that could have been made into episodes, it turned out to be pretty bad. It only lasted 3 seasons. So with my own very conflicted feelings about the show, let us discuss the MCU's biggest fumble. So, we got the announcement of a multiverse saga, which was already big enough on its own, but a whole series dedicated to alternate scenarios involving all these characters that we came to know and love sounded exactly like the kind of addition the MCU needed, and something fun for Disney Plus after the mainline shows ended up being pretty hit or miss. I very briefly talked about What If in my big MCU video a while back, and I'd say I mostly have the same opinions and some pretty fond memories of season 1, even though it took a while for the art style to grow on me, and even then I still don't like it at times. I do appreciate that this was an animated series. The ideas that we got this season weren't too groundbreaking or anything, but they felt like a pretty good foundation for something that could end up being great in the long run. Before rewatching the season for this video, I had actually never seen episodes 1 or 2, which is crazy because one of them has been the most impactful to the MCU and the whole show down the line, while the other won Chadwick Boseman an Emmy for his performance. But they're both pretty solid. As for the rest of the season, there's definitely some ups and downs. To this day, I would still say episode 4 of Doctor Strange is my favorite, hands down. It was an amazing mix of twisting something we're familiar with in the MCU and making up a good enough story that you could follow along with. And sure, it's used for setup later on, but I'm still a big enough fan of it on its own. And then sticking with the good, What If the World Lost Its Mightiest Heroes was a decent surprise that was a lot darker than I expected it to be. And it snuck up on me as another one of my favorites. It has one of my favorite twists in the series and made up a scenario that made me go, okay, this show could be good. Give me more stuff like this. But on the other hand, you've got an episode like What If Thor Was an Only Child, which was such a nothing episode. Seeing Loki in full frost giant form and seeing Thor fight Captain Marvel was cool, I guess, but there's no way you want me to believe that this was some of the best to come out of the writer's room. It's just another episode that purely exists for the sake of setting up the finale for the season. What if Killmonger rescued Tony Stark was probably the most random scenario out of all of them. It was a pretty good episode, but there were some moments where I was asking if Killmonger could really get away with everything he was doing. But again, it is the multiverse, so maybe everyone's not as bright as you'd expect them to be. And on the bright side, it was an episode that revolved around the first Iron Man and made me watch it again for the millionth time, and that movie is still phenomenal to this day. I generally like this season because of the consistent level of potential being on display from episode to episode. With it being season 1, I knew to temper my expectations, but I liked what I was seeing. One of the smaller things that really got me was the voice acting. Whether they got the original actors to reprise their roles or someone to voice a character like Tony or Ultron, they really did cook either way. And speaking of Ultron, What If Ultron 1 was another amazing episode that I forgot to mention alongside the others that stood out to me this season. Growing up, I remember Ultron scaring me so much, and while Age of Ultron was able to capture a little bit of that, especially with that one trailer they dropped, you know the one. This episode brought back that kind of fear Ultron's able to display. Him eventually becoming Infinity Ultron upped that fear factor tenfold and brought another top tier part of the series with its main villain for the finale. Despite me liking Infinity Ultron as much as I do, he does point out one of my biggest issues with the show that I'll talk about more later. The finale was alright. I didn't go into the show expecting a Guardians of the Multiverse by the end of it, but it came and it went and it was alright. The members were just the variants that we saw across the season, including a Gamora who appeared in an episode that eventually got pushed back to season 2. I don't understand why the Watcher would see this version of Killmonger, who pretty much betrayed any and everybody he could think of, and thought, yeah, let's put him on the team, but maybe he knows better than me. Never mind, because he ends up betraying them in the finale anyway, but it's okay because my GOAT sacrificed himself to save everyone at the end of the day. This season was good, and I quickly found out that it is unfortunately the best of the 3. And I say it's unfortunate because it doesn't even do anything crazy, but it had a good direction and an overarching story arc that I wasn't too mad at. With that in mind, let's get to when things really start to fall off. Coming off of season 1, I expected season 2 to offer a lot more of the kinds of ideas that really show off how crazy the MCU could get, but instead, it was more of the same and honestly worse than season 1. I didn't watch this season when it initially dropped because I honestly couldn't be asked to care. And although I mostly watched it to make this video, I feel like I would have said what I'm going to anyway. Despite hearing a lot of the negatives and how bad this season was, I tried to watch it with an open mind, but I quickly found out that this season was as bad at times as I heard people say it was. What if Nebula joined the Nova Corps was one of those scenarios that felt extremely random, but the episode actually had a strong start and it had me interested. However, I quickly found out that strong starts followed up by episodes that were either underwhelming or boring throughout the runtime would be a common part of the season, and probably the biggest issue I had with it. The story of the episode started to drag and it kind of just made me wish it was over more and more as time went on. Despite a cameo from the amazing Bulk, the Happy Hogan Die Hard Christmas episode didn't really move me either, and I love a good Christmas episode, so that's how I know they really messed it up. All the episode did was make me realize how much I miss Justin Hammer. If Armor Wars still exists, which it may or may not, there's no reason why he shouldn't be in it. I skipped through the Hella 10 Rings episode because it was very boring too often. And to end off the episodes that I just didn't like or care about, what if Kahori reshaped the world? I remember hearing about an original character that would debut in this season. I am all for new faces popping up, especially in a series dedicated to all these kinds of different scenarios, but it just didn't hit me at all. It served as an okay origin story, but in general, Kahori did not blow me away. And it was another one of those episodes where I just started to get real bored real fast. The episode where Tony gets stranded on Sakaar after the events of Avengers really seemed cool to me, but the execution was just terrible. I'm one of those people that don't really care for Korg. I enjoyed Thor Ragnarok, but the episode was just a little too silly. I liked the idea of him being stranded or outcasted somewhere. It would have been cool if he linked up with the Guardians, because that's a direct nod to the comics, but I just didn't like the way they did this one. Coincidentally, the only 2 episodes I liked both involved the Avengers. In the case of What If Peter Quill Attacked Earth's Mightiest Heroes, it felt really good to see an alternate Avengers roster, and Thor popping up was a decent surprise in what was a decent episode. The 1602 episode was pretty enjoyable, but I feel like it could have been better as its own standalone thing, instead of involving Captain Carter and the amazing Bulk again, but refocusing on Captain Carter and really the overarching plot of the season. That was my biggest issue with season 2. After Captain Carter's first episode and the assembling of the Guardians of the Multiverse, I definitely expected her to pop up again, and she did in her own follow-up episode earlier in the season. It was good, but I think I really liked it because it was just a redux of Winter Soldier, and that's like top 10 MCU right there. But I didn't expect her to become some kind of chosen multiversal being. And I definitely didn't expect Strange Supreme to just pop up out of nowhere at the end of Kahori's episode and end up becoming the villain of the season. After helping the 1602 Avengers solve an issue that involved a Steve Rogers time anomaly, Captain Carter gets approached by Supreme Strange. After telling her he needs help rounding up a bunch of variants that threaten their own universes, she ends up encountering Kahori and realizes that Strange was playing her the whole time. All kinds of shenanigans go on as Captain Carter tries to stop him from sacrificing all these beings to bring back the universe that he destroyed. It's cool, there's some good action thrown in, but it comes to a screeching halt at the end. Supreme Strange has been established as a pretty serious threat between his own episode, the end of season 1, and even this finale. And although she's been fighting him alongside Kahori, both of these ladies are having a pretty hard time against him. So the 2 of them get the craziest Hail Marys of all time from all the variants that Strange tries to use. Seeing this scene with no context when the season first dropped absolutely killed me, but I don't know if knowing what's going on made it any better. Not only because Captain Carter had just gotten her hands on an Infinity Gauntlet not too long before, but because Strange ends up sacrificing himself to really atone for his wrongdoings anyway, and restoring his lost universe too. If season 1's finale was alright, this one was okay, and season 2 was just okay. There were some good emotional beats sprinkled in, and some good moments, but when you strip them away, everything gets really boring, and I hate saying it over and over again, but it's just true. Finally, we make it to the home stretch, the grand finale that is season 3. The season where the concept not only derails big time, but shows off a lot of the problems that hold back the modern day MCU as we know it. Again, I didn't catch this one as it premiered week by week, but I caught wind of the general response. Unfortunately, the people did not lie again. This season, I think there were genuinely only 2 episodes I liked, maybe 3. What if the Emergents destroyed Earth? What if the Red Guardian stopped the Winter Soldier? And what if 1872? And although I liked them, I did have my issues with them. Everything else was either straight up bad and really boring or mediocre at best, while still being boring. Are you noticing a trend? The Emergence episode hit because I love me a good apocalyptic scenario that brings together a ragtag bunch who need to work together for the greater good, similarly to the Zombies episode from season 1. Then you slap on Mysterio as the main villain on top of that, and it made for a great episode. I loved Mysterio in Far From Home, and even though a lot of people hate the movie in its entirety, he is the major reason why I can't turn on it. But yeah, good episode overall. Nice to see Riri Williams again, since she debuted 2 years ago. The Red Guardian episode was one that did good at constructing a nice dynamic between Alexi and Bucky and staying interesting as the story went on. Meanwhile, What If Howard the Duck Got Hitched is very middle of the road because it was one of the strangest, most chaotic, confusing things I ever watched in my life. So much so that I think that the whole point was just how crazy can we make this episode about an egg who grows up to be a super powerful multiversal being that all of the factions of the MCU wanted at their disposal. It was a trash episode, don't get me wrong, but it was so trashy, it was hilarious. I truly could not imagine what the writer's room was like for that one. Turning back to the stuff I did like, the 1872 episode was cool. It didn't blow me away or anything, but I didn't hate my life while I watched it. And they had a cool nod to Iron Fist at the end. Everything else was the usual average at best or not for me. The Agatha episode was so not for me, I didn't bother watching it. She has fans, she just can't find one in me. But it wouldn't be a proper What If season without a government mandated Captain Carter appearance. And of course, she does pop up down the line. Now, I haven't discussed my boy Uatu the Watcher in the most detail so far, but Buddy is not good at doing his job. Throughout the show, he's done a lot more doing than watching, and this season, it finally caught up with him. As the other Watchers are getting ready to punish him, it comes down to Captain Carter to save him. But she doesn't do it alone. Instead of running it back with the Guardians of the Multiverse, we find out that she has assembled a team of exiles. This team consists of the one and only Captain Carter, Kahori, a fully grown Birdie the Duck, and Storm, the Goddess of Thunder, who would have been the last person I expected to see in the series if I hadn't heard about it 20 times before the season dropped. But they work together to go free the boy. The last 2 episodes revolve around them going to save him, but they weren't very good. There was a lot going on, but it was also a whole lot of nothing. An Infinity Ultron variant popped up again, which was nice to see in the second to last episode. The finale, What If, didn't just have one of the funniest titles of all time, but it was just bad. The exiles with the power of the Watcher, alongside the Watcher, fight the other Watchers. And this whole conflict ends with Captain Carter sacrificing herself to save her friends. It was hilarious though, because we got to see a bunch of potential variants of all kinds of characters. And these ranged from actually cool ones to what would an episode of that even look like. Despite all of this, I felt nothing. I wasn't sad seeing Captain Carter's shield on the ground or all her friends mourning this heavy loss. I wasn't amazed by the spectacle that was a What If series and the finale. I was confused because Supreme Strange ended up becoming a living universe, which caught me off guard. But maybe I did feel something, and that was happiness because the show was finally over. I think this season disappointed me most because it could have been better than 2, but it's worse for plenty of reasons, which I'll get to now. Now, I won't say What If was a complete failure because there were some good bits when you look closely enough, but the biggest travesty of this whole thing has to be the overall execution of the series. Hence why I call it the MCU's biggest fumble. The magic of the whole what if question is found right in those 2 words. If you tweaked one little thing with all these events and characters, what would be the outcome and how would it affect everything surrounding it? That's why there's a whole game mode dedicated to it on a game like Dragon Ball Sparking Zero, or why it's such a common question to ask with some of our favorite pieces of fiction, and even real life too. Look at Derrick Rose, one of the greatest what if stories in the NBA. It's a big question, and the biggest reason is because of how much potential it can hold. While the show was able to carry out some cool variations of MCU scenarios that we all know pretty well, I'd be lying so hard if I said that even the best ones the show offered were as good as they could have been. Obviously, one of the biggest things holding the MCU back has been all the legalities with ownership and contracts for past actors, etc. I don't know how much of that transfers over to the animation side of things. I don't know what kinds of limitations Kevin Feige put in place for everyone involved with the ideas that they came up with, but we definitely could have done better. And to go hand in hand with that issue, a lot more characters should have popped up across this series. With having him in so many episodes already, I would have very easily subbed in Isaiah Bradley for Alexei in the Winter Soldier episode, because if I remember correctly, they had a history in the actual MCU, and exploring something down those lines could have been cool. Spider-Man only showing up in the Zombies episode is crazy, but apparently he was supposed to have another one and there were some issues with it. And in general, Spider-Man stuff is always tricky involving the MCU. With Storm being in the series, X-Men 97, and mutants on their way to the MCU, I wish we could have seen more X-Men in the show. Apparently there was some miscommunication about having the rights to them, which I have a hard time believing. And we also could have had Wolverine if they knew beforehand, but it's okay at the end of the day. This series also didn't present some of the best scenarios either. There's the absolute layup scenario that fans were yearning for in What If the Other Half Got Snapped. That could have been a pretty easy one, and they even could have made it a two-parter if you really wanted to make a big deal out of it. There could have been some kind of appearance from the Defenders, like them being there during Infinity War or something. Maybe we could have gotten a better Secret Invasion scenario, but I think they want us to forget about that show. Completely understandable. It could have been one of the ones that we saw in the ending of season 3. You could have brought back my boy Phil Coulson. Remember him? Matter of fact, what if Ben Urich defeated Kingpin? If they put that in there, this series would have been a 10 out of 10. And in mentioning Phil Coulson, another issue I have that this series perfectly showcased is that there are so many characters in the MCU. Where the show messed up is that they reused a lot of the same characters across all of the scenarios that they did. And yet there are so many that we haven't heard about in years that even the actual MCU and the sacred timeline have failed to address. In the cases of Shang-Chi and Riri Williams, we haven't seen those characters for 2 years, and we don't know the next time we're going to see Shang-Chi. Ironheart thankfully comes out this summer after being delayed for like 3 years. The Hood debuted in this show before being seen in live action, and I know the strikes and everything else plays a role into this too, but you really see how disorganized things were when a show like this accidentally showcases it. But truly the greatest what if of all is what if this was simply a good show. Like I've said, it should have been an anthology series and they really should have kept it at that. If you're like dying to connect storylines, I would have limited that to each season or maybe certain episode arcs, but definitely not as much as they ended up doing and in as big of a way either. In my ideal world, every episode would have had its own art style too, just to really show off that these are different universes with different conditions. The last thing I think of when I hear what if is some kind of multiversal team being assembled or a single character like Captain Carter essentially headlining the whole show, almost showing up as much as the Watcher himself, and even crossing over into live action, even though it's not the same one. It's kind of ridiculous to me. All of these issues are definitely disappointing, but unfortunately, not the biggest surprise in the world. Marvel's modern day animation has been pretty lackluster. Aside from X-Men 97, there hasn't been anything truly memorable for a long time. And once upon a time, Marvel animation was peak. Spectacular Spider-Man, Iron Man Armored Adventures, which has received a whole bunch of attention lately, Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes, which I truly wish was just the blueprint for the MCU. And of course, how could I forget the iconic Next Avengers Heroes of Tomorrow movie? Obviously, there's plenty of others, but all of these outdo What If because of their unparalleled storytelling. Even though all of these things I've mentioned are animated and should be geared towards kids, these latter projects that I mentioned are very consumable as an adult, while What If feels very dumbed down aside from its occasional dark moments, and honestly feels like the most kid-oriented stuff that Marvel has put out in a while. And it makes the show even weaker. The MCU's animation slate really doesn't interest me too much. There is the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man series that will probably be out by the time I upload this video, and that's pretty much a dedicated What If series for Spider-Man, where a whole bunch of what would have happened in the MCU gets switched around, new characters thrown in, some taken out. There's a Norman Osborn in there. It seems interesting, but it also seems iffy. The art style is kind of throwing me off because the initial art that came out was 2D and I wish it just stayed that way, but I want to give it a chance, so I will. The Marvel Zombies show, I could do without. Eyes of Wakanda, I believe is going to be animated. I can do without it too. If they can really lock in with the animation, you'll see me tapping in again. Otherwise, I'm cool for the moment. What If was an unfortunate fumble, and I don't think too many people would disagree with me when I say it, but I'm glad that it's over. As time goes on, we as the audience really get to see more and more that the multiverse saga wasn't really as thought out as the Infinity Saga that we all love so much. And I think that's been the case before and after they decided to cut Kang altogether. I feel like the faster we wrap up the multiverse saga, the better off the MCU will be. And that's when we'll be able to see what kind of shape it'll be in going forward, especially competing with the DCU. This video is a lot later than it should have been. Thank you so much for 4K. Really appreciate the support. As always, thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and have a good one.
You be in Miami with your family, those your brothers, ayy. When we split apart, there's still love between our mothers, ayy. No, we ain't together, but whatever, I still fuck with you. Used to get the numbers, selling flights to get them dirty blues.